3 terrifying true stories. When friends share their darkest experiences. The flames danced higher as Colin threw another log onto the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the star-filled sky. The 3 of us had been planning this camping trip for months, a chance to get away from the city, from our jobs, from everything. But somehow, as we sat in this isolated clearing miles from civilization, the conversation had taken a dark turn. "You know," Mary said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been thinking about what happened to me last year. I never told anyone the full story." Betty shifted uncomfortably on her log. "Funny you should mention that. I've been carrying something around too. Something that happened when I was alone in my apartment." Colin poked at the fire with a stick, his face grave. "Well, if we're sharing, I guess it's time I told someone about the hotel." The fire crackled ominously as if responding to our words. We looked at each other and without speaking, we all knew this night would be different. This wouldn't be just another camping trip with ghost stories and urban legends. These were real. These were ours. Mary's story, The Stalker in the Shadows. It started in October last year. I had just moved into my new apartment, the one with the big windows I was always bragging about. Well, those windows became my nightmare. I first noticed him on a Tuesday. I was making dinner, and I happened to glance outside while stirring my pasta. Across the street, partially hidden behind a tree, there was a man, tall, wearing a dark coat, just watching. When I looked directly at him, he stepped back behind the tree completely. I told myself I was being paranoid. People walk down streets, people wait for buses, but the next day he was there again. Same spot, same time. This time I watched him for 10 minutes. He never moved, never checked his phone, just stood there facing my building. By the 4th day, I started documenting it. I'd take photos, but he was always too far away or too hidden to get a clear shot. The police said they couldn't do anything without evidence of an actual crime. Standing on a public sidewalk isn't illegal, they said. But then it escalated. I started noticing things moved in my apartment. Small things. My coffee mug would be on the wrong side of the counter. My bedroom door would be open when I was sure I'd closed it. The spare key I kept under the fake rock by my door. It was still there, but the rock was facing a different direction. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. I was working late and I decided to order takeout. When the delivery guy came, I buzzed him up without thinking. But when I opened my door, it wasn't the delivery guy standing there. It was him. He was taller than I'd imagined, with deep-set eyes and this smile that made my blood freeze. He wasn't holding any food. He was holding my spare key. "You should really find a better hiding spot," he said, his voice calm and friendly, like we were old friends. "I've been wanting to talk to you for so long, Mary." He knew my name. He'd been inside my apartment, God knows how many times. I slammed the door and deadbolted it, but I could hear him laughing in the hallway. Not a crazy laugh. Worse. A patient laugh, like he had all the time in the world. I called 911, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They found evidence he'd been in my apartment, displaced items, fingerprints on my windows from the inside, but they never found him. I moved out the next day, stayed with my sister for 2 months before I found a new place. I thought it was over, but last month I found a note slipped under my windshield at my new apartment. It just said, "I found you again. Nice windows here too. I still check every shadow, every reflection. I've changed my locks 3 times. I don't know if he's still watching, but I know he's still out there, waiting, patient as ever. Sometimes I wonder if moving just made it a game for him, if he enjoys the hunt more than the catch. The scariest part? I never found out how he got my name. Mary's voice trails off as she stares into the fire, her hands trembling slightly. Betty's story. Alone but not alone. My story happened last winter. My roommate Sarah had gone to visit her parents for the weekend, and I was looking forward to having the place to myself. Our apartment is on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown. You know the type. Creaky floors, thin walls. But it has character. Friday night was perfect. I ordered pizza, binge-watched Netflix, and went to bed around midnight feeling relaxed for the first time in weeks. But I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of someone walking around in our living room. Heavy footsteps, deliberate, like someone was pacing. I lay there listening, trying to convince myself it was just the upstairs neighbors. But our upstairs neighbors are the Johnsons, an elderly couple who go to bed at 9 p.m. religiously, and these footsteps were definitely coming from inside our apartment. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to my bedroom door. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. I waited for maybe 5 minutes before I got the courage to crack the door open. The living room was empty, but I could smell something. Cigarette smoke. Neither Sarah nor I smoke, and we don't allow smoking in the apartment. The smell was fresh, like someone had just put out a cigarette. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot. All the windows were locked from the inside. The front door was still deadbolted. Nobody could have gotten in or out. I convinced myself I had imagined it and went back to bed. But Saturday night, it happened again. Same time, 3 a.m. exactly. This time, along with the footsteps, I heard what sounded like papers rustling, like someone was going through our mail or documents. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The sound stopped immediately, but then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A chair scraping against the floor like someone had quickly stood up. I stayed in my room with the door locked until sunrise. When I finally came out, everything looked normal except our photo albums were on the coffee table. Sarah and I keep them in the hall closet. They were open to pictures of me, just me. In every photo that was visible, Sarah had been covered with small pieces of paper. Someone had been in our apartment going through our personal things, and they were specifically interested in me. Sunday night, I wasn't taking any chances. I set up my laptop to record the living room and stayed awake. Around 2:45 a.m., I heard the familiar sound of footsteps starting up. But when I looked at the laptop screen, the living room was empty. The footsteps were clear as day, but there was nothing there. No one. Just empty space where someone should be walking. That's when I realized this wasn't a break-in. This was something else entirely. I watched the screen for 2 hours. The footsteps continued, chairs moved by themselves, papers rustled in empty air. At one point, I watched our kitchen faucet turn on and off by itself. But the most terrifying moment was when I saw the couch cushions compress like someone had sat down, and then I heard a voice. It was whispering my name. Betty. Betty, over and over, but the laptop showed nothing but empty space. I moved out the next morning. Didn't even wait for Sarah to get back. I just packed my essentials and left. I told the landlord there was a gas leak, but here's the thing. I asked around about the building's history. Turns out 5 years ago, a man named David Reeves died in our exact apartment. Heart attack. He was found 3 days later by his landlord. He was a loner, never married, and apparently had developed an obsession with the young woman who lived in the apartment before Sarah and me. The previous tenant moved out suddenly too. Said she felt like she was being watched. I think David never left, and I think he's still there, waiting for the next young woman to move in. Still pacing, still watching, still whispering names in the dark. Sometimes I wonder if he followed me to my new place, because lately I've been smelling cigarette smoke again. Colin's story, The Shadow at the Old Hotel. Colin sets down his stick and looks directly at his friends, his voice low and serious. My story happened just 3 months ago. I was driving back from my business trip to Portland, and I'd been on the road for about 6 hours. It was getting dark and I was exhausted, so I decided to find a place to stop for the night. I took exit 47 off the highway. It's one of those exits that leads to a small town that time forgot. You know the kind. A few gas stations, a diner, and not much else. But what caught my eye was this old hotel sign. Grandview Hotel, vacancy. The building was massive, probably built in the 1920s. It had that old world charm, but also looked like it had seen better days. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few cars, and most of the windows were dark. I should have kept driving. The desk clerk was an elderly man who seemed surprised to see me. "Don't get many travelers on weeknights," he said, handing me a key, an actual metal key, not a card. "You're in room 237, third floor." The elevator was one of those old cage-style ones with the metal gate. As it creaked its way up, I noticed that the second floor button was missing entirely. When I asked the clerk about it later, he just said, "Second floor's been closed for renovations for years." Room 237 was at the end of a long hallway. The carpet was worn and the wallpaper was peeling, but the room itself was clean enough. I dropped my bag, grabbed a shower, and settled in for the night. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of music. Old jazz music, like from the 1940s. It was faint but distinct, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere below me, the second floor. I tried to ignore it, but the music was accompanied by other sounds. Footsteps, laughter, the clink of glasses, like there was a party going on. I called the front desk. No answer. I tried to go back to sleep, but the sounds were getting louder. At one point, I could have sworn I heard a woman singing. Finally, I got dressed and decided to investigate. The hallway was dimly lit by a few old sconces, and that's when I noticed something strange. At the far end of the hall, near the stairwell, there was a shadow on the wall. But it wasn't my shadow. I was standing at the opposite end. This shadow was tall, unnaturally tall, and it was just standing there, not moving, not wavering like shadows do, just perfectly still. I started walking toward it, and as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a figure. A dark, human-shaped figure standing in the hallway, but it had no features, no face, no details, just pure darkness in the shape of a person. When I was about 20 feet away, it turned toward me. I couldn't see eyes or a face, but I could feel it looking at me. And then it began to move. It didn't walk. It glided. Smoothly, silently, directly toward me. I backed up, but it kept coming. The temperature in the hallway dropped at least 20 degrees, and I could see my breath. I ran back to my room and locked the door. But I could hear it in the hallway, not footsteps, but this sliding sound, like something being dragged across the carpet. It stopped right outside my door. The doorknob turned. I had locked it, but the knob turned anyway. The door opened about 6 inches, and I could see part of that dark figure standing in the doorway. It stayed there for what felt like hours, just watching me through the crack. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At sunrise, the door suddenly slammed shut and everything went quiet. When I went to check out, the desk clerk was different, a young woman who looked confused when I mentioned the night clerk. "There's no night clerk," she said. "The hotel closes at 10 p.m. But the strangest part was when I asked about the second floor. She looked at me like I was crazy. "Sir, this hotel only has 2 floors. There is no third floor." I looked at my key. It said 237. I looked at the elevator. There were only buttons for floors 1 and 2. I had spent the night in a room that doesn't exist, checked in with a clerk who wasn't there, and encountered something that shouldn't be possible. I did some research when I got home. The Grandview Hotel burned down in 1962. 15 people died, including several guests on the 3rd floor who couldn't escape in time. The hotel was rebuilt, but they never added a 3rd floor. The thing I saw in the hallway, I think it was one of them, still checking on guests, still patrolling the halls of a floor that no longer exists. I drove past the hotel again last week. The sign still says, Grandview Hotel, vacancy. But now I know what kind of vacancy they're advertising. It's not for the living. The 3 friends sit in silence for a long moment, the weight of their stories hanging in the air between them. "Well," Mary finally says, her voice barely above a whisper, "I guess we all have our demons." Betty nods, looking around at the dark forest surrounding their campsite. Makes you wonder what else is out there, doesn't it? Colin throws another log on the fire, sending sparks into the night sky. Some things are better left unknown. As if in response to his words, a branch snaps somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp. All 3 of them freeze, listening to the silence that follows. In the distance, an owl calls out, or at least they hope it's an owl. The fire burns lower and the shadows grow longer, but none of them suggest going to sleep anytime soon. After all, some nights are meant for staying awake.